So it's very important to realize that menopause is a new beginning, but it is a definite crossroads. One place says grow, the other says die.
The other part that you've done a lot of work around and you've brought a lot of light around is menopause. And it's another one where I find a lot of times women dread menopause most of the time, and they're worried about it, and they're convinced that things like sexuality is going to drift completely away. And after listening to some of your work, you talked a little bit about the opposite of that, and I would like to talk a little bit about it because I feel like that's such an important part. It's like there's this huge, in a lot of ways, this huge awakening, I think, that's just waiting, and we've almost, women in a lot of ways have almost been convinced that it's almost like a death sentence. And this, again, when we look at a lot of different traditional cultures and Native American cultures, you are now almost like catapulted into this next phase of your spiritual journey even, and there's a lot of reverence around women when they've gone through that. You know, I think like Greg Braden even talked about that as like this council of grandmas that actually is able to carry the wisdom for the entire tribe, right? And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and I want to talk a little bit around sexuality with that too, because this is a very misunderstood thing in my mind.
Right. Okay. So everyone goes through what's called the Uranus opposition at age 42, and we call that the midlife crisis. It is where your soul says, what about me? You've been doing all this for everybody else, but what about me? When do I get my turn? And if you don't pay attention to that, that's when you get all the symptoms. So it's very important to realize that menopause is a new beginning, but it is a definite crossroads. One place says grow, the other says die. And if you look at conventional medicine, age 50 is when we tell everyone, okay, now you need yearly mammograms, you need a colonoscopy, you know, this is the beginning of the end, you better get your blood pressure checked. And there is no question that those things increase after menopause, but it is not from the changes in estrogen. It's from the fact that you have received, going back to the menstrual cycle, you've received however many, 350 opportunities to tune in to who you really are. And if you haven't done it, then perimenopause, menopause is PMS on steroids. And if you haven't done the growing, you're doing the dying. But the opportunity for growth is astounding. So women open businesses, and at the same time, many men at that time get very interested in cooking and gardening, turning inward. They've been out there in the outer world battling the woolly mammoth for a long time. They're now coming into their hearts. Women, the testosterone levels can actually increase from the inner stroma of the ovaries. And so they often are very wanting to go out in the world and do something out in the world, as it's a sort of, the men are doing this and they're doing this. And if you know that, then it becomes a very exciting time. It can be supported by bioidentical hormones. I myself created a company to bring Perarium mirifica into people's eyes, which is one of the phytoestrogens, one of the most potent on the planet, that helps with those mood swings. There's another woman who wrote a book called Meditating Through Menopause, where she found that every night at 2 a.m. she couldn't sleep. She just meditated and eventually, just went into this whole, oh my goodness, this is where God is. I am absolutely fine. So Herb Benson at the Center for Mind Body Healing found that women who meditate 20 minutes twice per day with a relaxation response have a 90% reduction in hot flashes. So there's so much you can do. And we know that, red wine and chocolate and sugar all burst hot flashes. My patients would say to me, okay, I know that if I have this Merlot, I'm going to get hot flashes. It's worth it for me. So once you know what the triggers are, okay, good, But there's nothing wrong with your body per se. There's a transition time, and the age of menopause the final period on average is 52. Some women it's up to 60. It just depends. But what the data shows is that the women having the best sex of their lives are in their 60s and 70s and probably 80s as well. And that was Gina Ogden's study, the ISIS study, long before we connected ISIS with anything else, the Integrating Sexuality and Spirituality study. And she did that study at Harvard, where she was a PhD sex researcher. And because what happens is that women have come home to themselves, they know their bodies, and if I have anything to do with it, they then know what their female erotic anatomy is. I just learned, when I wrote Goddesses Never Age, I asked Scott Layton, who is the illustrator for the New England Journal of Medicine, to go down to the Countway Library that's at Harvard and please get the plates of the female erotic anatomy, all the clitoris and where it goes, and and the urethral sponge and the perianal sponge and all the erotic anatomy, so that we could, make those drawings. He comes back and he goes, "It isn't there." I go, What do you mean it isn't there? Apparently to this day. Now, I just read this in a tweet, so what do I know? I haven't been in the field for a long time, but she said they still don't teach this in an OBGYN residency, the full extent of the female erotic anatomy. Women have as much erotic erectile tissue as men, but it's inside. And the G-spot, the so-called G-spot, is also called the sacred spot. And when it is stimulated, it has a nadi, goes right up to the pineal gland. And so it's connected with huge outpouring of DMT. So what happens after menopause, because the demands of child rearing and running a household or running a company aren't nearly as much, you have this opportunity to bring sexuality and spirituality together in a new way, so it becomes holy. And the other thing that you find is that by the age of, let's say 45, 50, 55, hopefully, a woman is discerning about who she's letting in. It's like, I remember listening to Charlie Ward, and he was talking about meeting his wife. And he said, I was a naughty boy. And I'm certain from listening to him that he was very naughty. And his wife wouldn't go out with him, but he wanted to go out with her. And after she finally went out with him with another couple, for protection. Finally, on the fourth date, he says, "You're the one." She goes, "I got to tell you something. I'll share my food. I share my car. I'll share my shelter. I don't share my man. So the minute you go with anyone else, it's over. I never want to see you again." And I think that for many, many women, that is a point they get to where they know they would rather be with themselves because they've come home to themselves. They no longer need a man to define them and tell them they're okay.